Welcome to Hotter Than Ever, where we uncover the unconscious rules we've been following, we break those rules, and we find a new path to being freer, happier, sexier, and more satisfied in the second half of our lives. I'm your host, Erin Keating. Welcome to any new listeners who have recently found this podcast. Even over the couple of months that I took off this summer, I noticed that there were new listeners finding the show all the time, and I am so grateful to have you here for these conversations. Welcome back to everyone who has tuned in from the very beginning of this show or who found us 100 episodes ago and have been devoted since then. Thank you for coming back this week. We are back once a week, and I hope you're pleased to see this episode show up in your podcast feed. There are a lot of podcasts out there. I am aware. I listen to a lot of podcasts too, and I'm so grateful that you are listening to mine and that my message is resonating with you. I'm glad you want to hear about empowerment and midlife and living a life that is most meaningful and valuable to you and who you are today and who you are becoming. What has been going on with me is that now that it's the fall, I have been reorienting my life toward planting seeds. I've been working to put the pieces together to launch my new business with my business partner in January and taking the steps to create branding and a website and a community space online. And it's all really, really fun. I love to build something. I have loved building this podcast. I have loved building every television show that I've been involved with. I promise I'll tell you more about it and not be so mysterious as we get closer to opening the doors. Suffice it to say, I am trying to enjoy the process of building as much as possible because that is a true pleasure for me, and I don't want to skip over that piece of the puzzle. I've also been planting seeds in my romantic life. We'll see if any of them come to full flowering. But I've been going out on more dates and looking for an actual boyfriend because while I love having friends with benefits, I've been craving having that one person who I can share all the parts of my life with and who wants to have an emotional connection. I'm not looking to get married or live with someone, but I would like to find someone who wants to be my person and who I want to have him be my person too. In this process, I have to face my own unavailability for intimacy. I hate to admit that that might exist in me, but I think it does. And I have to ask myself the hard questions about what I am afraid of and what I believe is possible for me. I have had a lot of first dates recently and some second dates. And I've been willing to put myself out there in 3 dimensions, which is a little bit harder for me than just pursuing friends with benefits or, a sexual relationship with somebody for the fun of it. I am willing, though, to be uncomfortable. And I am a grown-up who isn't going to be crushed if so-and-so doesn't like me or some guy ends up being a dud. To me, it's worth it to go through this experiment and to go through the process of actually looking for something quite intentionally. That does not mean that I'm not open to sleeping with sexy people along the way if the stars align. But for me these days, pleasure in my personal romantic life goes beyond sex. It begins with my relationship with myself and my own body and how much I've learned to be happy in my own skin, thanks to losing weight and addressing my gut health and dedicating myself to Pilates and self-care in 1,000 different ways. I honestly do not recognize this person sometimes, but I really, really like her and I admire her. And through incremental action, I am starting to become her. I wonder if you can relate to changing in any of these ways at a different point in your life, to becoming someone whose relationship with themselves is different than it has been in the past. I think that's what happens to a lot of us in midlife. My guest today is really perfect for where I'm at in life, and I think her wisdom will really resonate with you too. Dr. Diane Mueller is a sexual wellness expert with dual doctorates, in naturopathic as well as acupuncture and oriental medicine. She's the founder of the sex education center mylibidodoc.com, and she hosts the Libido Lounge podcast, blending personal experience with clinical expertise. And in this conversation, we talk about so many things that I think both single and partnered women can really relate to. We talk about how early experiences and cultural messages around sexuality can create shame and discomfort and make pleasure feel like it's not a healthy part of life, which of course it is. We talk about how pleasure and libido are dynamic and changing throughout our lives. I know I really connected with that. And that changes in desire can signal deeper emotional, physical, or relational imbalances that deserve attention and curiosity rather than judgment. I wish that I had the kind of presence of mind that Diane talks about when it came to the roles that pleasure and libido played during my marriage. Diane talks about how regular practices of self-connection, presence, and intentional pleasure, both solo and partnered, foster well-being and resilience and healthier relationships, not just in intimacy, but through everyday experiences and self-care rituals. Back to the very first episode of the Hotter Than Ever podcast, we talk about pleasure and how it's not only about sex. It is deeply connected to everyday mindfulness, sensory empowerment, and emotional health, especially for women who often, can you relate to this, prioritize taking care of other people and their responsibilities over their own joy. And one of the great pleasures of midlife is that you get to reclaim some of that mojo for yourself. This is a really good conversation, and I think you'll be able to relate. This is one that I think you're going to want to share with your friends who might be struggling to relocate their sensuality and bring pleasure back into their lives. All right, let's get hot. Dr. Diane Mueller, welcome to Hotter Than Ever.
Oh, thank you, Erin. I'm so excited to be on Hotter Than Ever.
I love that you're here. I'm so excited to talk to you about pleasure and libido and all the things you're currently focused on helping people with in your practice. But I would love to start out by hearing your story, because this is not the area that you started out in as a doctor.
It's true. It's true. My gosh. And it's always hard to squeeze all the elements of the story into a short little time period, but I will do my best to give you some of the cliff notes here. So when I was raised very, very strict Catholic. And I remember having a few moments of shame come up at a very early age around sexuality.
The Catholics are so good at that.
Yeah, I know. Shame, fear, and guilt, it's like they really, really got that down. And so one of the early memories I have, and I don't remember exactly what age this is, when I placed it, it was probably somewhere around 5. And I was playing with another girl on my cul-de-sac growing up. I grew up in the DC area. And we were playing doctor. And we were just being kids, being super innocent. I remember one moment of, I think it was something like, hey, do you want to see my private parts? And we just showed each other, just like curious kids, super innocent. And I get home and I just was telling my mom about this like it was nothing. And there was all of this what are you doing? This is bad. You don't ever show anybody. You don't touch yourself, all of that kind of stuff. So there was that initial feeling, right, of I think any parent does, right, trying to protect their child and all of that. And I had a really, really loving upbringing. Mm-hmm. So I'm very, very fortunate that way. But because of the values around religion and sexuality, that was this initial feeling of this is bad, right?
God, isn't it amazing? They just hand it to you they're here's some issues to work out. You're doing normal kid things, trying to figure out your bodies.
Exactly. No problems. And there'd be so many amazing ways, like looking back at that and like doing inner child work. It's like there's so many amazing ways that could have been handled around, like, honey, how beautiful you're curious about this part of your body. These kind of things are really beautiful and sacred, and these kind of things we do in private, and tell us more about that later. But there's such a way that could have been handled.
Totally.
You
But
know,
parents don't get that education, and what they're getting is like social control and shame through the church. So
Correct.
just pass that right on down.
Correct. And that's why it's like there's no blame
Yeah.
right, that I have there. It's more around just like going back and being like, oh, well, that's where that story came from.
There's some origin story stuff there. Yeah.
So that happened. That was one of the first beginning things. And then later on, when I was in college, I happened to have a roommate, one of my first like really good college friends, who was really open about talking about her masturbation practice. And that was like, masturbating. And I was like 18, 19 years old. And I was like, what is this woman doing? But I really, really liked this girlfriend, right? And so she got me a little curious, and she did something that was the opening, I think, of sexuality for me, which was she bought me a book. And that book, I'm sure, is one it's Sex for One by Betty Dodson.
Classic.
Classic, right? And so that was like my kind of first like lens into there's something here from just like, this part of my body is really designed for pleasure. And fast forward a few years later, I started developing these really strange urinary symptoms, right? Where it was like I could just feel this intensity of like my bladder and felt like my vagina, and I was going to the doctor because all these like pain, it was keeping me up at night. STD tests were run, as that's what we called them obviously back then. Now they're STIs. And also, all sorts of urinary tests, right, were run, and everything was normal, which was great, but it didn't explain why am I up at night?
Right.
Exactly. And so one night I decided to masturbate, and it was like, holy crap, the pain went away. It's like, this is useful. And then tried it again another night. The pain went away. And I did this several nights in a row. And eventually then the pain just completely went away. And I never had this pain again. So
what was it?
Well, you know what I think it is now? Like now that I've like gone through, my medical profession, I actually think it was a level of interstitial cystitis. So that's where we have like leaky gut of the bladder. And it will feel almost like this painful sensation, like you have to like pee and urinate, but you don't. And tests like I took are normal. So that's what I have kind of come to the conclusion once I got my medical knowledge that that's what it was. And this essentially is an inflammation of the bladder, but it's a neurological problem where the nerve of the bladder, like the bladder works by stretch receptors. So it's like as the bladder starts to expand, it gets bigger, 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 bigger. When it gets super full or medium full, that's what sends the signal from the bladder to the brain that says, hey, urinate, right? With this condition, it's a neurological thing where the bladder stretches only a tiny little bit and you get that neurological trigger. So I think when I've reflected back on this, what was actually happening was this was potentially the condition I had. And because of this neurological issue, and we see now studies that are showing neurological repair with things like masturbation. So I think that must have, helped that neurological signal and that neurological inflammation to calm down.
That's amazing. I've got to say, I bet there are listeners listening to this podcast who heard the word masturbation and went, oh no. Like, oh God. I can imagine my mother listening and going, oh, do we have to talk about that? Like, not that she, that was an off limits thing in my house growing up or anything like that. But I just think we're so, God, it's just such a part of the culture to be like, we don't talk about Bruno. Like we don't talk about certain things, and it makes us uncomfortable, even the language of it. Maybe it needs a rebrand. I'm about the rebrand. Rebrand menopause, rebrand masturbation. Let's like find some other way to label it.
Well, I was even talking to my my partner about this. So this was last night or the night before, and he called my lady parts my flower. And I remember he had said that years ago.
Throw up. I don't know why.
Really? I kind of like it because I'm trying to like rebrand. And it doesn't have to be that, but I'm trying to like rebrand like okay, we can't keep calling it vagina and like
It's
pussy I
gross.
love, but pussy has such a negative connotation and it's so much to overcome. And
Mm-hmm.
yoni's great, but not everybody is like,
It's very woo.
it's
Yeah.
very woo. So it's like, and so this was a test, right? So
Flower is nice. Flower is nice, but flowers are not that active. Do you
right,
know what I mean? Like
right.
they're just a thing of beauty. And yes, there's,
True,
petals and whatever the metaphor you can extend.
true.
Pollen, I don't know.
Well, we're workshopping this.
Yeah,
So,
but I like it. I like it. I'm gonna put it. I did this on another episode where I wanted to work on rebranding perimenopause because it's just
yeah.
the worst. And I put it into an AI software, and I think the one we liked the best was the spicy years.
Ooh, I like that.
So maybe we need to do that with some medical nomenclature as well.
Yes, yes. And what a great use of AI.
Yeah, seriously,
Good.
gotta have it be doing something good for us.
That's exactly right. But it is important to talk about, because
Yeah,
I do think making the conversation around masturbation or whatever word we're gonna
yeah,
label it as, like we have to get to a point where we're realizing like this is actually part of health. Like
yeah.
this is part of how we're keeping the vagina healthy as we age as women, right? This is how when men and women are really supporting blood flow to this tissue with age. It's preventing atrophy. It's preventing pain. It's, beyond even all
It's
the
such a
pleasure
core
stuff.
part of us. It's such
It
a
is.
core part of us. I think people still get squeamish about like take a mirror and take a look. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Even our 40s, 50s, like and beyond. Like I think if you haven't made friends with her already,
Yeah.
like, it's time, ladies.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. She's part of us,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it really, and men get to know it. They get to see what they look like all day long, right?
Yeah.
There's no shame there.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
it's a really
So, but
important
you
thing.
didn't start your medical practice wanting to talk about sex and libido and pleasure.
No, no. I mean, it was something I was always interested in, right? For all these reasons, like I became interested also throughout my life. I've been throughout my life twice in polyamorous relationships, and
Mm-hmm.
that really opened me up to a wide variety of like conversations and really, interested me in the conversation of like who some of these relationships are for, who does
Yeah.
well and open, and I'm now in a monogamous relationship and this is my vibe, right? And I've realized over the years like, oh, these are the reasons this type of relationship works better for me.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, like no, my initial practice was not in this. My initial practice has been in Lyme disease, mold illness, really complicated chronic, diseases.
Hardcore.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
And this other topic has been something that I've just been kind of studying on the side, right? Reading books, studying things with my partners, exploring things with different partners I've had over the years. And so 3-4 years ago, when I started realizing that as much as I am like loving the impact I get to make in the chronic illness world, that from a standpoint of really beginning to help more people, which is what I want to do, it's very, very difficult to do that on a one-to-one model, and
Mm.
Lyme really needs to be done in much more of that type of way. So I really started looking and saying, well, what else have I studied? What else do I have a lot of knowledge in that I really could, jump, have a foundation in that I could jump in from there? And what else am I interested in talking about for the second half of my life? And
Yeah,
here
I
we are.
love that. I love that. And when we talked before this conversation, you said one thing that motivated you was transitioning from conversations about pain to conversations about pleasure.
Yes.
And I just think that's so like you can take control of your life and your career in that way and sort of put this new filter on it and go, actually, like, okay, pain remediation and solving that problem for people has been meaningful and helpful. But
Yes.
now like let's get into the juicy stuff, the feel good stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's so much, I just think there's so much need, right? Because like you said, like we're like squeamish to even say these words. And the number of times I run, even in my more clinical work, sometimes I run into people that are married or partnered for a long time, and sex has dwindled down to something they fit in, a few times a year. And there's this heaviness around this, and nobody talks about it. We just kind of like accept this as like, okay, this is just my life. And I just think we're just capable of humans of experiencing so much more joy and intimacy in our relationships. And so we got to start making these conversations like, out in the public, making this a much more normal medical health, life, happiness, type of conversation to have.
I
So,
agree. I agree. And, I was in a marriage where the last 10 years there was no sex.
yeah.
Maybe there were a couple times, but it was always fraught, and wasn't good, and it was symptomatic of the dysfunction of the relationship overall. And so when that marriage ended, and longtime listeners will be very familiar with this story. I've been sort of relitigating it over and over again for myself. But, I definitely went out in search of my own pleasure, and my own agency around my sexuality, and look for partners who were also seeking pleasure and seeking exploration, and for whom my pleasure and my orgasm, was like a toy they wanted to play with over and over again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Why not? Right?
Yeah.
Like we have this capacity to create our love life, our pleasure life in any way we want. And I think we get stuck in these scripts, whether it's in our partnerships or whether it's just in our love life, even outside of a committed partnership, of just kind of going through the nuances and just being like, okay, this is just what it is. This is how I experience pleasure or not, versus actually realizing we have like the ability to recreate, to ask for, what we want, to explore what we want, to create that with a partner. And I love also the ability that we have as humans to change our mind. Meaning it's like what's working for us like 10 years ago, like if your libido needs and your sex needs, your intimacy needs and your love needs are different, like that's okay. They're supposed to change. Like, I like things in my intimate life now that I was not interested in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, and we just evolve radically. I mean, I think women, because the nature of our hormones throughout our lives are cyclical, and they change all the time throughout the month, and then they change when you head into perimenopause, and then they change as you head into menopause. And we are used to this sort of dynamism of our own bodies and our own evolution. But I don't know that I think a lot of times women feel victim to it somehow, as opposed to like, let me take the reins of this and create the experiences that I want to create, instead of like just being subject to like, I'm battered around by the seas of hormones,
Well, exactly. And I think when it comes to intimacy, I think there's a level of, well, men should just know, right? And sometimes
do not know anything.
Right.
We have to show them all the things.
Yeah. And so if we don't, and that's where I think it's just so important that we learn the things, because if we don't know, like, how can we begin to, to show them? And I think anytime we start to bring the script, the love, intimacy script of a past lover, a past partner into a current relationship, and think like, oh, this past person, well, I did X, Y, Z, they just absolutely went crazy. And we try to apply that to our current relationship. We're really, really doing our partner a disservice, because, and I think there's this like misunderstanding that once you learn a woman's formula, A plus C plus D, which is not always going to be the same even in one woman,
right.
But there's this misunderstanding that you learn that formula and it's just like plug and play to different women. And it doesn't work that way.
No, and I think like the cultural narrative is that for men, there is one way, right?
Right.
Like for us to please our partners, there is one way. And if you are with the right partner who has the right mindset and who is, exploratory and less like, just orgasm oriented.
Right.
There's so much fun to be had. There's so much pleasure to give each other. There's so much revelation in the experience. For me, I have, because I've gone so deep into it in the last couple of years in my own way, I have really enjoyed just it's not linear. It doesn't have to be linear, and it doesn't have to be goal oriented, and it doesn't have to be anything in particular. It has to be what the two of you or more of you, whatever, however you roll, like create together,
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And that's why so much of my work does focus on like the novelty in monogamy. And it's what I do at my libido club, is because while I do think like these open relationships, these types of constructs, right, are really the right thing for the certain individuals, for individuals that's not the right thing for, when people say they're bored in monogamy, in my mind, there's so many different techniques, tricks, positions, places, things like role playing. There's so many different ways of adding newness that I think the boredom actually happens because we just haven't like put the effort, or even we haven't been trained or taught or sat in the creation enough to think about like, well, how do I do this differently than I've actually performed with every single lover, or with this lover every single time. So we get, I think, overwhelmed in life because of stress and all the
Oh,
things,
yeah.
right? And just what do we do when we get overwhelmed? Well, oftentimes we take the easy, normal way. We cook the same things. We go to do the same workout. We oftentimes pick out the same clothes because our brain is overridden with so many decisions and the stress of it all. So we just are like, okay, these are the things that have worked. I'm just going to do these things. And sex is no different, right? And intimacy is no different. And we fall into those scripts sometimes in the relationship with just one person because that's just the way we've done it. And it takes
Right.
effort to do it a different way.
Right. Can we talk about pleasure outside the bedroom? Because
Yeah.
I'd love to provide the listeners with like a baby steps path towards reconnecting with pleasure. If there are lives, which so many of us, especially if we've been good girls and we followed the script and we've done all the things right, we've like stopped playing around in our 20s and we got real serious about our careers, and then we found a partner and we had children and we did all the things we're supposed to do. We're very good at operating in lockstep and being in service and checking all the boxes and looking good from the outside. And I think a lot of us hit our 40s and 50s and go, wait a minute, what was this for?
Yeah.
Why was I doing it this way? What are these rules I'm following? Like, and we're starting to see people who are questioning those rules and blowing up their marriages and pivoting in their careers, and finding new ways to do things and moving to Mexico City or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, I do.
yeah. I think, but it's hard to figure out how to make how to sort of begin to evolve towards a new place when you are stuck in the place of your patterns,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think to ground this conversation, I think the statement I say a lot is the process and the practice of being and experiencing pleasure is directly connected to the practice and the process of being present. Right. And so when we're talking about pleasure in day-to-day life and like recommitting to like, I don't have to be a stressed out monkey all day. I don't have to run around like with like a headless chicken, as my mom used to say.
Yep.
Like I can really, really enjoy the process of being in the world each and every day. And the way to that is largely connected to our pleasure body. And the pleasure body, like I said, is really connected to presence. So when we are intimate, we'll talk intimacy and then we'll talk outside of intimacy. When we're intimate, we can't have an orgasm if we're not thinking about what's happening in our body. It's very impossible to have an orgasm if I'm like, oh, this position's making me look fat, or like, oh, I forgot to do that thing for my kids, or we can't have an orgasm when our brain is thinking all those things, right? And so in day-to-day life, the practice of pleasure is the practice of how much in every moment can I actually show up and just take a breath, right? And be here in this moment with you and like feel the specialness of this moment, feel the pleasure of like this chair. It's why I have furry stuff in my background, right? I'm like always surrounding myself in fur for this reason of like, I'm very, very, very tactile. And I know that the things that bring me simple day-to-day pleasures are like, I'm going to take a moment between my meetings and I'm going to take a few breaths and I'm going to get in my body and I'm going to feel the furry stuff, which drops me into my body more because of how tactile I am. And so that's really what it is. The practice of pleasure is the practice of saying, okay, I'm going to actually be in the joy of the five senses and experience the touch on my skin. And if there's a fan in the room, maybe I'm taking a moment just to be like, oh, wow, I love that tickle of that fan, right? Those really simple things that allow us to enjoy and to be in our body and the experience of our body more and more. And then that, of course, leads into how we show up in partnership, right? How we show up for ourselves, how we show up in the bedroom, all of those things. We're teaching our body to actually experience pleasure all day long.
I love that so much because I think what most of our default is this,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Is to just get on your phone, just to look on Instagram or to check your email or see who texted you or, you know, doctor your photos or do whatever it is that you do on your phone. I think that has really supplanted our senses in so many ways. I think it's, God, I think about it all the time. This sort of, you know, this conspiracy to hijack our attention, our sensation. And no wonder people are alienated from their bodies and from each other and feel isolated and lonely and disconnected. Like the idea of, okay, I'm going to put down my phone. I'm going to override this extraordinary technology that's programmed to attract me to it like a moth to a flame. And I'm just going to take a couple breaths, or I'm going to pick up my pen and journal, you know, or I'm going to spray some perfume or light a candle in my room and just enjoy the scent of that. Like, or I'm going to go outside and walk and breathe and be in my body. Like, it is really challenging in this day and age when we are isolated and wired up to tech to prioritize senses, sensual pleasures, like our bodies, all of it. I mean, it's really like, and it's not a character flaw that people can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, how do you suggest people, especially women who are responsible for fucking everything?
Yeah.
How do we start to make those little shifts for ourselves?
One of the first, I mean, you bring up the phone is like one of the most obvious things we have to start with. So getting push notifications off your phone,
Turn it all off.
Unless it's like a message from your child, right? Except for the essentials. Get all push notifications off your phone, off your computer. You don't need that. Like what I do from a standpoint of like wanting to check in on accounts and like scroll and all that. And I was avoiding that for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
And 6 months or so, I started getting back into it after probably not even touching social media. I've had all my team, like I'll make my content for social media and then my team does everything. So I don't even have to log on.
Yeah, that's great. That's ideal.
Which has been amazing for a long period of time. And then I found myself just like getting online every once in a while 6 months ago. And it's just crazy how it creeps in. So I started finding there was some value I was getting out of this. And, you know, certain memes would pop up and they would make me laugh. And there was like, you know, stuff like that happens too. And then I started getting, you know, into the addiction that everybody has. So what I caught myself, and now what I do is I'm allowed twice a day, and I put my alarm on my phone. I'm allowed twice a day, 2 15-minute segments, one at the beginning, one at the end of the day, where I can just do the scrolling thing. And then the alarm goes off, and then it's over. And I can't do that until tomorrow. And so having some sort of structure around if you're like, oh, I'm not ready to like give this up and this feels valuable to you, having a time box on it and starting to make this the new normal around like, I can do this, but after this, now I have to go breathe. Now I have to take my walk. And because of that, like, I'm not doing that other thing that other people do, like, which is scrolling while you're walking. And, you know, it's like getting off of that. And that dopamine that we get, right? So what starts happening is every time we get that push notification or we scroll, it's like dopamine, 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 dopamine. And we find that like with any hormone, any neurotransmitter in the brain, in the body, when we start getting flooded with it, our body gets resistant to it. So then we
Right.
need more to get that same result. And so when we start taking this away and our body starts repairing and we start like having that overwhelm of dopamine in the body starts responding to, when we do get it much better, which is much more satisfaction, much happier, much more orientation to pleasure. So definitely those things. And the other big thing is like, don't watch things that don't make you feel the vibe you want to feel. Like
Control it for yourself.
control it. Like whether it's the news, whether it's some sort of movie, whether it's a show, how do you actually feel at the end of watching it? Do you feel angry? Do you feel scared? Do you feel frustrated? If you feel all those things, it's probably not the vibe that's doing you anything. So if you need to have your night of like vegging out on the couch, fine, but what can you do to actually veg out and like create a vibe and a feeling in your body that is like, oh yeah, like now I feel peace, now I feel pleasure, now I feel joy, now I feel hope. And really using that time to create and live and breathe the vibe that you want to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle with that because I do want to stay informed
Yeah.
about what's going on in the world. And I do want to keep up with, the encroaching authoritarianism, and I do want to know what is happening, but I have to be really careful about it and counterbalance. Like if I listen to a political podcast, then I have to make sure that I've got a lot of good music going, as an antidote to that, or I listen to something funny, or I spend time with my dog. Like I really, I think we all struggle with that because you can't be so totally head in the sand about the world around you and only be like good vibes only, good vibes only. You know what I mean? You kind of get that cult of hyper positivity, which is all just denial. So it's a real balancing act to prioritize pleasure and then also, acknowledge reality as well.
That's why I give myself those 15 minutes a day is exactly that around like, how can I keep informed and time box this, right? And how can and I think for every individual, that's like
Gonna
a
look
unique,
different. Yeah.
well, it's going to look different. Like exactly. For me, like that's what I've learned around like much more than that. Like, and I kind of go down this dark rabbit hole in my brain. And so I've learned like, that's like, I can catch what I need. There's probably not much more happening that I need to know in 30 minutes a day. So I can catch what I need and move on. And that's a place where I can find peace. And for some people, it might be 5 minutes. For another person, it might be an hour, whatever it is. But I think having that awareness of like, okay, I'm going in here for this purpose. It's going to have this impact, but it might have this benefit. And if it has this impact that's like maybe not awesome, how can I pull myself back out of it? So, because I agree, like I think we can get into this point where we really get into this almost this new agey type of extremism where everything is peace and flowers and unicorns and all that. And it's like, but everything's not like, and being in that vibe all the time it's not human. Human is colorful life. There's good times, there's bad times. We got to, navigate through it all and have the wide variety of emotions that come with being humans. But how do we do that? And how do we tap in and get back out so that we can, in most of our lives, be approaching lives from this way of like, wow, I'm experiencing my day through joy as much of the day as I possibly can. Yeah,
I want to feel good. I want to feel pleasure, even if the world is like, Los Angeles, like literally burning around us. Like, it's still okay to not only be focused on the negative. It's still okay to have joy and pleasure. And in fact, probably makes you more resilient. I don't know what the science is, but I feel like if you spend your whole life in this sort of cortisol like stress hormone wash, then the world does not have the bright colors that we are meant to experience.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And human growth does come through challenge, through overcoming. And that's where I think personal power comes from too. Is like, holy crap, like I got through that. Like, wow, what else am I capable of? Right. So it's
Yeah.
not supposed to be just roses and flowers. But, I think that's where back to like the pleasure conversation, I think that's where pleasure really is super helpful, right? Because oxytocin, our pleasure hormones, it balances stress, right?
Yeah.
It helps us, supports, modulates dopamine. It helps us feel good. It even helps things like bones and hormone balance, right? So there's sleep. There's so many different studies on the power of this hormone from a standpoint of balance. So, in talking to so many people in the sex world, right? So many of us have regular pleasure practices, and whether that's like solo pleasure or partner play, whatever it is, but it becomes a priority because that's one way in this world where we're overwhelmed and
Yeah.
inundated with so many things. That practice of pleasure through non intimacy as well as intimacy really does create hormones and create chemicals that help to balance out all of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What do you say to the women listening to this podcast who go, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I need that part of my life anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to like be mucking around in that stuff anymore. That was for me when I was young. That's for the beginning of a relationship. That's, so okay, so I don't have the libido I used to have, meaning I don't want sex. I don't want the kind of physical intimacy. I had someone on the podcast named Dr. Maureen Slattery, who is an OBGYN and sex educator. And she said, I asked her basically like, how do you define having a problem with your libido? And she said, if you think you have a problem with your libido, then you have a problem with your libido. There's no objective measure of like, well, my libido should be this. It should be that. But what's your point of view on that, where women just feel like, look, I'm too, that's a younger person's game.
Thank you so much for asking me this, Erin. It's one of my favorite questions to answer. And this woman you interviewed is right? Like from a doctoral perspective, from a medical perspective, hypoactive sexual desire disorder is basically the medical term for low libido. And the definition is so dumb. It's having a low sex drive for 6 months. Well, what does that mean? Like,
what does that mean?
Exactly. It's like it's such a subjective, thing. So like, how do we know if there's a problem? So there's a couple of things I would say to women in that regard. One is I would encourage you to go take my libido quiz, just at libidoquiz.com. Super easy. And I say that because low libido is actually a medical symptom. And low libido, how I would define low libido, is interest in sex less than about once a week, right? And so if that is, because that's what we're seeing from a standpoint of health benefits, from a standpoint of relationship, right? Having a level of libido and the hormones that are being produced have a ton of benefit when it comes to things like longevity, when it comes to things like healthy weight, when it comes to things like healthy bone. So I see this a lot in like various things of like medicine, right? So, people will come in and be like, well, my right knee's been bothering me for a while, but it's okay. Or I only poop like once a week, but it's fine. It's not bothering me, right?
Yeah.
So we can say this about any symptom. Like any symptom you could look at in medicine as being like, well, it's not really like taking over my life, so it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But in health, we always have to remember that all of these are symptoms of your body being out of balance. So whether it's low libido, whether it's like knee pain, whether it's a digestive thing that you've just chosen to accept, it still is saying something that is out of balance. And the time to check when something's out of balance as a medical professional, as a holistic medical professional, is when it's small, because you want to find these things when it's like, oh, something's like out of balance. Like low libido is one of the early warning signs of a cardiovascular disease, both for women as well as for men.
Or it's a sign of a bad relationship.
It could be that too.
I mean, or it's a sign of stress. I mean, like I can literally picture people listening to this podcast and going, once a week? Oh, that's what's normal? And they're rolling their eyes and going, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I have sex on vacation.
Right.
Like I can't relax enough to get in the groove. Like,
And that's the imbalance,
I have
right?
too much responsibility, and that is not imminently fixable.
Right. That is definitely the imbalance, right? And so and again, like I'm not, saying like there's not a medical definition of once a week, right? But I'm looking
Right.
at this from a standpoint of like how often do we see when we see surveys of couples that are the happiest and we look at how often are they intimate? It's all about an average of once a week, right? And so in my work, I'm like working to help couples stay happy and in relationship and intimate and close and falling in love with each other over
Yeah.
and over and over again.
That's what we want.
Right. And so if we want all those things, then yes, this is probably going to be connected to that. And so it is one of these things like anything else in health, like, like, okay, well, if your digestive problem's gone on for years and you're just okay with it, we're ultimately autonomous on our own health and well-being. Like we have to make that decision around like, do I like preventative medicine? Do I want to listen to my body's signals? Or do I'm just going to say like, I'm not going to worry about it right now. And libido is absolutely that way. But to just think that we're giving what I like to say to people is like information, right? Because what we're giving up when we're saying, I don't really worry about that. It's obviously our total right. But I like people, anything, I feel like my job is always to educate. And I like people that are making those kind of decisions to start thinking about and at least asking themselves the questions like, if this was a sign of a cardiovascular disease, would I want to know that? If this is a sign of my neurological system being out of balance, would that be worth exploring? If my relationship could improve and I could be closer and fall in love with my partner all over again, would that be interesting? So, and maybe people get to the same answer, and that's fine. That's the beautiful thing about being autonomous in our, in our lives. But I think one of the most important things when we're saying, oh, that's not for me, is to really make sure we're not just looking at this from a low libido standpoint, but asking ourselves the questions around like, would I benefit from improving my health? Would I benefit from being closer to my partner? Would I benefit from falling in love again? And we might find that if we ask ourselves those types of questions, then we might be like, come to the, conclusion, for example, of like, wow, I don't know how I'm going to do this because I'm overwhelmed and I can't fit one more thing in, but maybe I'm like at least a level of interested because I realize this is not just about sex. It's about all of this other stuff too.
Right. Totally. Totally. And I also think it's about your relationship with yourself.
Yes.
It's about your relationship with your own pleasure and your body's capacity. I think we underestimate that. I think it's like, well, I'll pursue I'll take a look at my libido issues, for my marriage, for my partnership, for my longevity, for my well-being, like, so that I could be around for my kids when, because I want to be a grandmother. Like, I think there's a lot of, I'll do this for others.
Yes.
And what I really want women to think about is doing things for themselves.
Yes.
And showing up for themselves. Because like, even the smallest, like, okay, this is so random, but I've been really obsessed with oils, like body oils. And I've been trying like every kind of oil because I find that as I get older, my skin is super dry. It needs to be moisturized all the time. And so now I'm just like the queen of oils. And that is a sensual experience that I have with myself that is so highly pleasurable every single time. And it's like, let me get every little corner of my body. Let me pay attention to myself. Let me care for myself. Let me make sure that like all the bits and pieces are moisturized, So like, I don't know. It's small, but it's also like you deserve pleasure in your body, to enjoy being in your own skin, to enjoy walking around in the world as you. And when we don't look at our capacity for pleasure and joy and sensual expansion or connectedness or whatever, we're just missing out on something that is like, you don't need anything external to get that.
Yeah, I'm giggling inside and outside because I have had a lot of conversations with my girlfriends about the covering our whole bodies in oil practice. So you would fit right in. Yeah, it's so sensual. And I'm also thinking of another friend right now who has for many years had this practice of her alarm goes off and one of the first things she does is masturbates every single day. And when I've asked her about it, it's like one of the reasons she does this is because she has a very stressful job and it's a way of helping her balance her stress hormones before she goes into the day, right? And so we forget about this, right? We forget there's so many things from just like, we can do this too with an oil practice, right? Like just rubbing the body like that, we release so much oxytocin. It's so much, so nourishing. It's a different way of experiencing pleasure. But there's so many different things we get out of taking that moment and saying like, oh, in this moment, I'm just going to feel the pleasure in my body from this very, very simple, but also very sensual practice.
Yeah.
And these things can go so far.
They can. And also, if you're a person who is like, that's not me. Yeah. I can't relate to that. I don't get that. I will just say that I didn't used to be this person either.
Yeah.
I didn't used to be this person. And I've given myself permission to be this person. And I'm no different than anybody else. I maybe am more sexually curious, and I want to have these conversations and bring them to my audience. But I think your curiosity about yourself and your curiosity about how do I make my one and only life here on this planet like as full of all of the positive experiences that I can possibly have. Like I think that's what your work is aspiring to do. And I think it's just so important, especially, in these very alienating times.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's, another thing that I think drives people to this thing of saying like, you know what, I'm not interested anymore is I think so often we're having what I sometimes call like the wrong kind of sex.
Oh, yeah.
Which, to me, I just define that as like sex that is not the sex for our pleasure body. And so many times we shut it down because it's like, well, I'm bored, or that doesn't feel good, or I'm not orgasming, or like this isn't interesting. And it's because like, it's like using your oil as an example. It's like thinking of some, like, I don't like the smell of patchouli, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like me putting patchouli oil all over my body. And if that was like given to me as an oil and like this was the oil practice, I'd be like,
yeah,
no,
I don't want that. Right.
I don't want that.
I don't want to smell like Burning Man. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Nothing wrong with Burning Man, but
Burning Man's great.
Like that, right?
Yeah.
And so the same thing I think with sex is that I think sometimes we get into these things around with anything and around being like, I don't want this thing, because we've never actually been shown or taught that there's a different way and a way of approaching this that is actually, as it could have a very, very, very different experience to us and our pleasure body. And that's a lot of the work I'm really doing in the world is trying to get this hedonic word unassociated with pleasure, right? Where it's like, oh, pleasure is just hedonic and it's bad and all of the negative connotation, and actually be like, God, spirit, whatever we want to call this energy, gave us this feeling of pleasure, gave us these chemicals of pleasure.
It is built in.
It's built in, and it's built in for a reason, because it actually helps all these other processes in our body come into balance.
That's right. It's a spoonful of sugar.
It is. It is.
Well, Hotter Than Ever is all about giving women permission and ideas for how to do things differently in the second half of our lives. Yes. So what do you want our listeners to take away about what is possible for them in their lives over 40?
Oh, so many things, but if I'm going to boil it down, your life, you are capable of having your wildest dreams, and your wildest dreams around joy, around your relationships. And just because you're in a relationship that maybe is working for you in so many ways, and if you're listening, you're like, I love my partner and I really want to be with my partner and this person's amazing and this is just not part of what I signed up for, that the cool thing about, reaching our 40s and our 50s is I think there's a level that most of us get to in a way around like not giving a crap as much, around finally being able to be in your truth and your power of anything you want. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know how to recreate and have a different type of relationship where you're closer to your partner, falling in love all over again, that it might not look the same way, it might take a different approach, but that we really are capable of recreating our lives at any moment, at any given moment. And that is totally possible for you. And, go take my quiz. If you need help, definitely come join I have a very, very, low cost entry club where you can learn techniques and tricks and how to talk to your partner and, all the different benefits of a pleasure practice and more. So, come join my club if you need support. But there really is possibilities for having the relationship of your dreams, whether that is with your current partner or whether that's with somebody new.
And with yourself.
And with yourself. Thank you for adding that. 100%.
Yeah. This is a wonderful conversation. I feel like you represent some real possibility for my listeners, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody.
Okay, so we'll put all your stuff in the show notes, mylibidodoc.com, and please go check it out. Thanks for listening to Hotter Than Ever. I hope you enjoyed this conversation about pleasure and libido and self-care with Dr. Diane Mueller. Is there someone in your life who needs to hear this conversation, who may be complaining to you that she has no sex drive and she wants to figure out how to get it back, or she misses intimacy with her partner, but she feels like that's a chasm that she doesn't know how to cross? Share this with them right now. I'll wait. Just press that little button. Yep, right there, and text it to her. Great job. She is really going to appreciate that. Hotter Than Ever is produced by Erica Gerard and Podkit Productions. Our associate producer is Melody Carey. Music is by Chris Keating, with vocals by Isa Fernandez. Okay, wish me luck on my date tomorrow night. We had a good phone conversation, but you never know how something is going to feel in person. Please visualize scintillating conversation and very sparky energy and a hot makeout session next to my car at the end.